Hello, 6th graders. We are in our Order of Operations unit, and our lesson today is 1-8 from the textbook, which is on properties. And our learning targets that we need to write down are I can identify properties from mathematical expressions, and I can use properties to solve problems. All right, some questions that I want us to think about before we begin here are, what does it mean or look like to have equivalent expressions? So this is two expressions, okay? Expressions are things like 3 plus 4, okay, and equivalent means equal. So in this case, we would be looking at what is another expression that also equals the same thing as 3 plus 4? Well, 3 plus 4 equals 7, so we could also say 6 plus 1. Those are equivalent. They have the same answer to them. Another thing to think about is what is a property in terms of math. So if you hear the word property, a lot of you might think of like land or something that you own. In math, a property is like a rule. Okay. Zoom in here. Here are some properties. There's some different types of properties, some vocab that we'll be going throughout the video. So as we go, you'll jot them down. So we've got properties. There's the commutative, associative, distributive, identity. Those are all properties. And then equivalent expressions, which we already talked about what equivalent expressions are. Those are expressions that equal the same thing. Now there's a little note down here. It says once you go beyond the set of real numbers, the properties may no longer hold true. Okay, just something to note. We're not going to worry about that right now. All right, our first property here is the distributive property. All right, so if you think about the word distribute, like when I distribute something in class, I hand each person a piece of paper. So the definition of the distributive property is to multiply a sum by a number. You multiply each addend, okay, each number that you're adding of the sum by the outside number of the parentheses. So what exactly does that mean? If we look here, I'm going to zoom in on our examples. We have in parentheses 4 plus 6, and on the outside we're taking 3. The distributive property would tell us that we take this 3 and multiply it to the 4 as well as to the 6. So then we would get 3 times 4, 3 times 6, and we would add those two together. So it's just taking the number outside the parenthesis, multiplying it to each thing inside the parenthesis. So in algebraic terms with letters, we take the A and multiply it to the B as well as to C. All right, so here's some examples we're going to try. If you can try them on your own, go ahead. Otherwise, follow along with me. So it says use the distributive property to rewrite each expression and then evaluate or solve it. So starting here, we take the 6, multiply it to both things inside the parenthesis. So first we take 6 times 3, and we do want to show each of our steps here. And we are adding, because our problem here is adding, 6 times 4. Now we can evaluate or solve. 6 times 3 is 18. 6 times 4 is 24. Okay. 18 plus 24 gives us an answer of 42. Okay. Next one. Now on this one, they have already wrote it once it was distributed. So we're going to go back. We're going to work backwards. Let's first solve it, and then we'll write what it would look like before we had distributed it. So 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 5 is 10. 4 plus 10 is 14. Now, if we look, notice we have the 2 in front of here, of each of these. So that's what is outside of the parenthesis. Now, inside the parenthesis, we're taking 2 and multiplying it by 2 and by 5, because we took that and distributed it to both of those. Okay. Next one. Again, take the 9, multiply it to each thing inside the parenthesis. 9 times 5, we're adding 9 times 1. 9 times 5 is 45. 9 times 1 is 9. 45 plus 9 is 54. All right, something to think about here is how can using the distributive property help you to be more efficient and more confident in your problem solving? For example, how would it come in handy in this problem that we're looking at here? It says the Tour de France is a cycling race through France that lasts 22 days. If a cyclist averages 90 miles per day, about how far does he travel? Well, if we were to try and do 90 times 22, okay, you could set them up vertically, do your long multiplication. But something else that we could do is we could take this 22 and split it into nicer numbers to work with, which would be 20 plus 2. Okay, 20 plus 2 is the same as 22, and now we're taking 90, and we're still multiplying it by that. And then the distributive property tells us we can distribute the 90 to each of them. So 90 times 20 and 90 times 2, well, 90 times 20 is 1,800, because I know 9 times 2 is 18, add my 2 zeros. 90 times 2 is 180, add those together, 1980. So that tells us that a cyclist would bike about 1,980 miles during that time. So that's just a way to use the distributive property to make a multiplication problem a little bit simpler. All right, here are the other properties that we are looking at for this lesson. The first one is the commutative property. Okay. And the stuff, just write down here what these specific things. So there's two parts to each of the properties. There's either the property of the commutative property of addition and the commutative property of multiplication. Just depends on what operation we're doing. So I want you to write down the things that I circle here in red. So the commutative property is telling us that the order of which a number is added or multiplied will not change the answer. So A plus B is the same as B plus A. And A times B is the same as B times A. So 4 plus 1 is the same thing as 1 plus 4. Same thing, 1 times 4 is the same as 4 times 1. The associative property of addition or multiplication tells us that the way that we group numbers does not change the property. So I want you to write down this and this. Okay. So if we had, they have it here in letters, A plus, in parentheses, B plus C, if we were to move the parentheses to A plus B and do that first, and then add C, we would get the same answer. Same with multiplication. So if we had 1 plus, in parentheses, 3 plus 2, well, that would be 5, 6. And if we were to change it and have it 1 plus 3 plus 2, well, 1 plus 3 is 4, plus 2 is 6. Those are the same. And the last one is the identity property of 0 and the identity property of 1. This property says that if you add 0 to any number, you get that same number back. And if you multiply any number by 1, you get that same number back. So some of these things you've already seen before, you maybe just didn't know they were a rule. They are rules that we need to start learning and remembering. Okay, some more examples. I'm just going to give you another example of each one. Commutative, so you can change the order. So 5 plus 9 equals 9 plus 5. Okay. Associative is the way that you can change the groupings. So if you had 3 times 1 times 5, that would be the same as 3 times 1 times 5. Let's check. 1 times 5 is 5. 3 times 5 is 15. Sorry. And on the other one, 3 times 1 is 3, times 5 is 15. Identity property of 1 means we can take any number, 7, multiply it by 1, and we would get that same number back. Identity property of 0 says we can take any number and add 0 to it, and it does not change the identity. It stays the same. All right, we're going to look at some examples here, and we're going to name the property that is shown. All right, so first one here, we are taking 1 plus 2 plus 3, and then we are changing it to 3 plus 1 plus 2, but they would both get the same answers back. So when we change the order of something, that is the commutative. Oops. Next one, 16 equals 1 times 16, so we're showing that we can multiply a number by 1 and it still gets the same number back. So that is the identity property. Next one up here, we are doing 5 plus 7 in parentheses, and we're multiplying that by 4. And then they're showing that we can distribute the 4 to each number inside the parenthesis. So that would be the distributive property. Oops. Next one, we have 2 plus 1 plus 5, and then we are changing it so the 1 plus 5 is in parentheses first, and then plus 2. So in order to do that, or that is telling us that we can change the groupings, or where the parentheses are, but we would still get the same answer back. And that is the associative property. All right. The last one, 12 plus 3 equals 3 plus 12. Again, we are changing the order, but the answers will still be the same. That is the commutative. All right. All right, on here we are trying to solve these problems mentally and using different properties in order to help us solve them. So originally they had 4 times 12 times 25, and we're solving that mentally, and we had to justify each answer what we're doing in order to make that work. So the first thing that they did was they changed 4 times 12 times 25, and they changed it to 4 times 25 times 12. Okay, and that's the commutative property, saying that we can change the order. Then we can put groupings on the 4 times 25, because that is a multiplication problem that we should know off the top of our heads. That's the associative property. And then we're just multiplying. Well, 4 times 25 is 100. 100 times 12 equals 1,200. All right, so we're going to try that here on this one, 89 plus 15 plus 1. Well, if you look and you note 89 plus 1, that's much easier to work with than 89 plus 15. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my groupings. 89 plus 1 plus 15. I haven't changed the problem. I still have the same numbers I'm adding. I just rearranged it. And that is the associative property. Now, 89 plus 1 is 90 plus 15. And then I can now solve 90 plus 15 equals 105. So by changing the order, it made it a little bit easier to work with. Okay, here's a summary of all of the properties with examples in case you want to take another look at them. I will hand you out a little half sheet of this in class tomorrow, so don't worry about writing all of this down. All right, that is all for 1-8. If you are still stuck, you may go back and rewatch the video. Look in your textbook for more examples. Try some stuff on Khan Academy. Otherwise, you can go and take your 1-8 NICU at this time.